old days, we used to. Anyone here got a family whistle? Anyone old enough to do that? You walk up the driveway and you whistle, let them know that you're family. That you either come to borrow money or muck up. This is a reclaiming language. Do bring out, do bring out, do. Do bring out, do bring out, do. Natuk miringi, natuk miringi. Do bring out yana. Do bring out, do bring out your name, do bring out, natuk miringi, natuk miringi, do bring out miring, do bring out, do bring out man, do bring out, natuk miringi, natuk miringi, do bring out min ma, do bring out min ma, do bring out tananbu. Do bring out tananbu. Natuk miringi, natuk miringi, natuk miringi, natuk miringi. Thank you, spirits. I'm on country. Thank you, spirits. Thank you, spirit sun. Thank you, spirit land. Thank you, spirit man. And thank you, spirit woman. Natuk miringi. To the TOs and to all you mob as well. And thanks very much for the great work you do in and around language. I want to begin today. Today's actually about a legacy that we've inherited. It's not about a guilt trip. It's not about welfare or handouts. It's about the legacy of a 230-year-old cultural clash. It's about what was, what is, and most of all, it's about what can be. It's about hope. And there's a couple of things that I want to bring up about the possibility of a tomorrow Australia, about language as a cultural authority, about who we can be as a nation. So I'm Richard Frankland. I'm a Gunditjmara fellow. I've got English and Scottish heritage. And I put this PowerPoint together yesterday and checked it after a couple of glasses of wine, so I'm not sure what I've actually got. But we'll all go on a bit of a discovery journey together, eh? You can see up there that one of the researchers, Dr. Melissa Rizuki and Dr. Peter Lewis, two of my colleagues who work with me in different areas, but they overlap. We work on cultural strengthening and using the arts as a tool for cultural strengthening. And Dr. Sophie Couchman, who's worked with me on the Macassan Yolgnu project, we've got a film coming out soon, and is working on the Gunditjmara Alive, reclaiming language through song. So I want to begin with this. Captain Cook never landed on Australia. Well, he landed on every First Nation person, and he's still landing on us. And that's a thing called transgenerational trauma. Now, if you have transgenerational trauma, you have to have transgenerational resilience. That's why we're still standing here. That's why we're still reclaiming language and culture and ceremony and still fighting for our land and, in many ways, for the soul of our nation. This is what Captain Cook actually landed on. And down there you'll see the Gunditjmara people, which in my language means extremely handsome, bald, old black man. The Victorian Corporation for Aboriginal Languages will have a blue with me about that meaning, but that's okay. So, what was at first point of contact around 250 languages, about 500 different dialects. Now, that's as good a guesstimate that we'll be able to get. What we have left is about 100 languages and some creoles that are spoken. We don't have a lot of speakers of these languages. So we've got a bit of a fight on our hands, not only to reclaim, not only to rejuvenate, but to maintain and somehow seep it into the norm of society. That's what we ended up with, and some of the old people tell me, well, they look like veins, like the skin's been stripped off. Now, this is what I call a basic law circle. And in many creation stories, not all, but many, when the creators took us to the land, they said, here's the language that belongs to the land. And that gives us communication. And communication wasn't just about language, it was about interacting with the spirits, with nature, multiple dimensions, yeah? That gave us story, and story is the lifeblood of any law. The story gave us song, and this gave us music and rhythm. Yeah? When you have that, you end up with dance. Now, who here's danced alone at night, drunk, with no one around in their house? Just a show of hands, just so I've got a lot of... There you go, so I'm not the only one, I'm glad. So, these skinny black ankles can shake a leg, I'm telling you. That dance gave us ceremony. Yeah? And when you've got ceremony, it forms ritual. Now, they spin off into kinship structures, totems, and all types of business, yeah? The next thing that gives us is an hierarchy, because you need someone to run the ceremony. You need someone to maintain the rhythm, and that gives us clear roles. And all of this is bound together by language, yeah? So your relationship to land is about language. Your relationship to country, to trade, all of the key things that we once had. This, of course, gives us an education system and a health system. And all of those link in together to create law and protocols and a social order. Now, what we have is, where did language come from? So you have the spiritual interpretation for our mob, but some researchers, Claire Bowen, for instance, says it all came from around Burketown. Yeah? it's written there, all Aboriginal languages came from up around that way. So who knows, you know? So there's a master map somewhere. I haven't looked at it properly, yeah? So I want to go to this, because to learn about what we have to get back, we have to learn what we've actually lost. Yeah? So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, everyone familiar with that, so I don't have to explain it? Basically, you get to move up these type of levels to the pinnacle, to self-actualisation. And everyone's motivated, every society is motivated to do that. But it can be disrupted by things like invasion, yeah, which really buggers your day up. The impact now is phenomenal. You know, we have the highest suicide rate in the world amongst our youth. Yeah? So if we put this in a blackfella context, pre-contact, and this is something some students of mine did, and I don't know how to stop that spinning, but I can make a feature film. Right? What we see here is, in a very loose way, a First Nation cultural shape. Yeah? And when the point of contact came, we were left with this and no real access to the wealth and power of our cultural authorities, including language. Yeah? So the devastation was phenomenal. Now, when we look at that, we often use let's look at the non-Indigenous interpretation of this time period, yeah? What we see is we use the word massacres. Now, how does that word make anyone in this room feel? Yeah? How does it make you feel, the word massacres? Sad? Depleted? How does the word battle make you feel? It shifts me from being a victim to being a warrior. So we use language in a whole heap of ways to continue dehumanising and placing my mob into a victim mentality. Does that make sense? So it's a two-way street. We're reclaiming, but we need to reinterpret. Because my mob fought an 18-year war down on Gunditjmara country. If I have transgenerational trauma, I have transgenerational resistance. Does that make sense? So there we are again. There's the Gunditjmara people. I told you what the word means. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is to return to a whole heap of culturally safe, culturally secure, cultural authorities. Because at the moment, our circle is responding to a heap of Western Eurocentric boxes known as government and institutions. And you can't fit around society into a square one. So essentially we have to come up with something. And to my mind, we have to re-establish these cultural authorities in a myriad of ways. And language is a really important part of it. Now, Stanner, young Harley mentioned the Great Australian Silence. The Boyer lecture that Stanner did in 1969 basically elicited 4 key things that happened to First Nation people. The 4 levels of disempowerment. So homelessness, and then that was made illegal, a legal fiction came out, terra nullius. So we had disconnected from land and languages related to land, yeah. We were powerless, so our cultural authorities were taken from us and placed with a dominant culture sitting over top of us. Poverty, we weren't allowed to own things in the Western way, and the things that we owned in a traditional sense were seen as invaluable. They were seen as things of no value, yeah? And disorientated, where do we fit and how do we fit? And that applies to here and now as well as then, yeah? So we need to answer these. And that's why language is a key component of establishing First Nation cultural authorities that can integrate with Eurocentric cultural authorities. But it has to be done with respect, with clear objectives, and with clear recognition of what was taken so we can assess what is now. Patrick Wolf, now deceased, says the nation of Australia is built on that invasion essentially is a structure, not an event. So it still happens here and now, yeah? Marcia Langton says being regarded as the undifferentiated other is disempowering. So we're all the same. So that means me as a saltwater man, and we all know the saltwater people are beautiful, the same as the river people, but it's not the case, yeah? We have different cultures, but we have an overarching culture, yeah? And we have an overarching experience of invasion and displacement. But we interpret, all of us individually interpret those traumas on a deep personal level. And language is a healing factor in that. What is cultural safety? Because that's ultimately what we have to seek. And the Māori nurses said that it's basically about being able to speak your language and culture without fear of ridicule and condemnation. So when I was a young fella, if I spoke language at school, it was seen as a real problem by the school. Now, when we're navigating something, one of my colleagues, her and I discuss Master Sun Tzu, the art of war. And Sun Tzu says, win the battle before you go into it. And that means having good data, good knowledge. So there's forces for and against cultural safety. And what young Harley was talking about was number B when he was referring to researchers imposing external processes from a dominant cultural construct. Now, we only make up around 3% of the population. So if we went with A and we totally owned all of those processes, it wouldn't work. We can own key aspects of those processes. The third one is the one I think is most important, and that's collaboration. Healthy and strong collaboration. So what is cultural safety? I interviewed 131 people along with Dr. Peter Lewis and Professor Muriel Bamblett in 6 communities across Victoria, asking 90 questions on what is cultural safety. And what came out was, I won't go into too much detail, but it's a book called Forever Business, Restoring and Reclaiming Cultural Safety in Aboriginal Victoria. Speak, learn or reclaim your language and customs. A key part of rebuilding culture and cultural authority. So what's the current state of play? Yeah, here we go. So this is from the 2016 Census. There's a whole heap of languages but still being depleted, and mainly in the northern areas being spoken. What we see the great work that the Victorian Corporation for Aboriginal Languages are doing, but they're doing it this much work with this much resources and that much time. I'll invoice you for that, Harley. No, you're right. We can see a further breakdown here. I won't go into detail on these. Yeah. I will, there's a bit of a pie chart, and you can actually see that it's broken down where these languages are spoken. We notice that there's not a lot of eastern or southern languages up there. Yeah. Now, these aren't really 2 proposals. One's in action. So Sophie Couchman and myself are coordinating reclaiming language through song. And the way we're doing it is recording individuals singing language songs. I'm learning how to use these new modern cameras, which is quite emotional for me. And also a bit of an interview. What does it mean for you to be singing language? Where did you learn it from? And we will hopefully be able to take these songs, about 15 to 20 musos, into different communities down home, and do workshops learning the songs and put on a concert and film the lot, and then produce a paper that actually tries to get this going in other areas. Yeah? So we're doing it on Gunditjmara country, but we'll also locate Gunditjmara people living in other countries. So basically, succinctly, it's to record language songs, to film and record the process, to compile data from a series of interviews, to hold a concert, to have enough songs for the first Gunditjmara language album, which will for the first time be sung by Gunditjmara people. So we really want to, we really think that's important about identity, role, and about furtherance and maintenance of culture. There's the Gunditjmara rung, Gunditjmara down there in the bottom left corner. Now this is the one that's going to create a bit of a, I haven't even referred to my notes. Oh well, we won't worry about them now. Basically, I came up with a concept to try and draw us together as a nation, because we're constantly not recognising the strengths of diversity. So the idea was to initiate and introduce a lingua franca, that is a one language, as an auxiliary language to First Nations people. That doesn't mean we diminish the reclamation, revitalisation and maintenance of existing languages, or those that we're trying to reclaim. What it means is that we create an access point to the wealth and power of First Nations culture by having one language, one dance, one song. And eventually for this to be accessible for non-Aboriginal people. The idea is that we unravel the cultural tapestry of a nation, because it's not working. If it was working, my people, you wouldn't have 100% of the youth prisons in Northern Territory, 100% are Aboriginal. You wouldn't have that if our cultural tapestry was working. You wouldn't have the massive land issues. You wouldn't have chronic illnesses to the extent that they are. You wouldn't have the access point always in the shape of the dominant culture. So we need to unravel that cultural tapestry and stitch it back together, and language is a pivotal part of that. There's pros and cons. A common language breaks down geographical barriers, but it also endangers vulnerable languages. I'm not going to go through all of these because I understand I don't have much time, is that correct? Thank you. So there's a whole heap of pros and cons, which I'm happy for people to get hold of. We'll be releasing a paper on this down the track. My conclusion is basically this. One, there's some really brilliant programs going. My language is being taught at the Hayward Secondary College, and it took a great lot of effort and following not only community protocols, but we had to get resources from outside the education system because there seems to be powerful people lobbying for our languages not to be taught in schools. I think we need to establish further language curriculum in schools and institutions. We need to rename, I'm at the moment putting it on Parks Victoria, and they've agreed that not in writing to change all the Latin names of plants back to language names so that we actually find what they were used for. Simple things like that, that's not a big, hard thing for a large institution to do. What's hard is to shift that attitude because they see people in these powerful positions often see us as a problem as opposed to a people facing a problem. Now, if I'm facing that type of deprivation of culture and language as a First Nations man, then my non-Aboriginal colleagues are facing something either darker and greater, facing ignorance. So we need to make sure that our organisations like Victorian Corporation for Aboriginal Languages and other programs are well resourced and well supported in a multitude of ways. And that doesn't just mean money, it means resourced with people, with support and healthy attitudes. And the final thing is, we need many voices to change a national identity, and it won't happen in my generation, but it will happen. We need to recognise that language is a key tool in reclaiming, rebuilding and reimagining a cultural authority that's welcoming and honouring First Nation peoples, what was, what is and what can be. We need to name this type of venture, and to me, I want to call it Tomorrow Australia. And we need to be brave, we need to be courageous, we need to be visionary. We shouldn't be scared of saying that in 20 years' time, this is the Australia that we want. We need to plant seeds for our children and our children's children in the form of language, culture, the arts. The arts is a tool to do that. I think this is more about hope and opportunity than it is about a problem. And I think that all of us, many of us, most of us are on the same page. To me, I think Tomorrow Australia is inevitable, and I think that we need to bind together so that we can contribute. Language is a key tool in shaping who a nation can be. Thank you very much.